to type in some of your questions, there's an area on the keyboard, on the dashboard on your screen where it says questions. You can just type them in. And the system will mute you, but please don't put your call on hold because we may be able to hear the background music. Before I turn the controls over to our presenter, I just want to make sure that you're comfortable with looking at your screen. You can see all of the controls on the right-hand side. And at the end of the webinar, there'll be a brief survey that pops up on your screen when you log off. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey and give us your important feedback. Don't forget to check our schedule of upcoming webinars. All of our webinars can be found on the calendar on jcca.org. And many of our past webinars and this webinar are recorded and archived, and they're all available on jcca.me. So now that we're all comfortable in front of our keyboards and our screens, I'd like to welcome our presenter for today, Caroline, and have her start our webinar.
Great. Thanks so much, Joy. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to be talking about, absolutely, communication skills, but I entitled this Cultivate Win-Win Relationships with Customers, Colleagues, and Community. And I toggle back and forth between talking about relationships and talking about communication, because if you think about it, really a relationship is built over a series of communications over time. So if you look at having an interaction with someone, sending an email with someone, having a meeting, a presentation, a dialogue, so that in and of itself is a communication. But then over time, you're going to build that into a relationship. And sometimes with people, perhaps it's a prospective customer that doesn't sign on, sometimes that interaction, again, is just a one-time thing. But this is all about the relationship. And so I did want to focus on both communication and both relationships. So yes, my name is Caroline Ceniza-Levine, and I'm a career coach with Six Figure Start. My background is in human resources, and I thought, since this is a webinar, I wanted to make the About page, instead of a series of bullets, something more visual. So on the left side, that's me and my business partner, Connie Fanisula-Saraccio. We met over 20 years ago. We were both in recruiting. So we have seen, between the two of us, we have recruited for over 40 years, a combined 40 years, and we have hired thousands of people and seen the careers of thousands of people. And so when we wanted to work together again 20 years later, we thought about, what was it that we wanted to offer. And we wanted to offer really the employer's perspective, having seen, again, so many careers be managed, what makes people successful. So that's really the genesis of Six Figure Start. That group photo is actually a magazine ad. In 2010, I won a grant from Jones New York Empowerment Fund for my work specifically with people over 40. And so I got to be in a magazine ad, and I feel like my family got to know what I do for a living because they would see me in a magazine. I also appear as a guest expert on CBS, on CNN, recently on Fox Business. I write for Forbes.com, a work-in-progress column. I was co-author of How the Fierce Handle Fear. I wrote about career issues specifically and fear. There were other business leaders who wrote. Donald Trump contributed to this book and wrote about having no fear. So we tackled fear in a number of different ways. I also co-authored 6 Steps to Job Search Success. And then the big picture on the lower right is actually me doing stand-up comedy. So I always talk to my own clients and to my own audiences about the importance of both the professional foundation but also the personal foundation, and I try to live that by having a life outside of my career, and that includes stand-up comedy. So that's more about me. Now I wanted to know more about you, because we can only guess who is on the line. I don't have your RSVPs. I don't have information about you. So what I always love to start with, and you can just use your question box, and there's a reason why you took time out of your day to attend this webinar. I would love to know what that is. What is your most pressing question about relationships, about communication? What was it exactly that brought you to this webinar? And again, I'd love if you could use the question box and start typing things in. I'll leave space at the end of my presentation for questions, but this will give me a good window into what people care about. So I'm already starting to see some questions come in, so this is great. And I'll be looking at that from time to time. And again, as you think of questions, because I'll just be taking questions at the end, but we can start a queue here in the very beginning. And as you think of your question, please add it to the question box, and that'll give me a great idea of what people are thinking about. So let's jump in, and I'll give you a little outline of what I'm going to be covering. I'm going to cover 4 elements of a relationship. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is feelings. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is very actionable and very practical, but I'm actually going to open with feelings for a good reason, and you'll see that in a second. I'm going to talk about you. So I'm going to talk about the role that the individual plays in a relationship, right? So it does take 2 to tango, and one of those is you. So let's talk about what are those factors that you're bringing into the communication and then to the broader relationship. We're going to talk about the other person and the other person's perspective. We're going to talk about the actual communication. So remember when I talked about, is it a dialogue, an interaction, an email, is it a meeting, is it a presentation? So just thinking about the communication event when you're actually interacting, that, all of that taken together helps establish, the relationship. And then I'm going to talk about special considerations for managers, because I know that there are going to be different people on this call, and I know that some people are not only responsible for their role, but part of their role is perhaps managing a team, perhaps managing an entire department. And so what does that mean when you are trying to support other people to have good communication skills, good relationships with their colleagues, with the outside community? What does that mean? What can you do as a manager? So I'm going to talk about that as well. I am seeing that questions are coming in. Tori, I don't know if you can write this to me in the chat box, but my question box is so tiny, and I'm not sure how I can adjust that or if that's something that you can adjust on the other side. But I just wanted to throw that out there, Tori, and I don't know if you can just, again, use the chat box and give me a message. But I'll jump ahead while we're figuring that out. Okay, so let's talk about feelings. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. And I always say feeling good is actually a very valuable relationship metric. Sounds very squishy, but it's actually a good way to measure how you're doing. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. So the first thing that I want to leave you with is that as we talk more and more about kind of the actionable, tactical stuff, I don't want you to forget that really the overarching theme of what makes a relationship good, what makes an individual communication successful, is that both parties feel good. You know when you're resonating with someone, you know when you've done a good job explaining something you're really getting through. It feels good. It doesn't feel like you're lording over someone or patronizing someone or whatever it is. And as the recipient, let's say that you're asking a question and then someone's answering it for you, you don't feel like you're being patronized, or you don't feel like somehow you're being misled or manipulated or whatever. You feel good. And so one of the first things that I want to highlight around successful communication and successful relationship building is just that awareness of, okay, does this feel right? Does this feel good? And so a little bit of practice around that, and you can do this exercise now. You can spend a few seconds doing it now, or, after this call, you can really just find some quiet time and think about your favorite interaction in the last 30 days. It might have been a conversation. It might be an overall project. It might be signing up a new member, or, registering someone for a class or something, or whatever it is that you did in the last 30 days. But we all have these instances where, wow, we really connected. So think about that in the last 30 days, and think about, who was this interaction or this communication with? What did you actually talk about? What did you do? What was going on? And why did you feel so good about it? Was it that you just clicked? Was it that you felt like you used all of your skills and you solved a problem, you're trying to really get a clear sense for yourself about what feels good, where you do your best work, what type of situation or what was going on, what was in the environment. And the question is, what can you repeat in other interactions, right? So what about that favorite interaction that you had in the last 30 days, what about it can you bring to everything else that you do? And again, this is an exercise that you can do a number of different times. You don't have to just do it now. Okay. So let's talk about your role in this. So I always just say you control you. So if we think about kind of the three big things that you're bringing to an interaction or a communication or to the relationship, well, there's you. How are you feeling? And when it comes to being on the job, do you bring your best self to work? Are you fully committed, fully focused, or are you distracted? Is there something regarding your energy level or something? And so again, this is going to change throughout the day. This is going to change from day to day. But part of this is just an awareness that you're bringing something. But then there's also your environment, right? So the space in which you work, is it set up to support you? Do you have what you need in terms of supplies, in terms of information? Is your role clearly defined? Do you know everything that you're supposed to be doing with everyone you're supposed to be doing it with, right? So who do you work with? Who are you serving? Are you really connected to this? Right? So this is just about exploring, are you clear about all of this in terms of what your role is, your environment? Do you have everything that you need? And then there's the individual situation, right? So certain times can be busier, can be more challenging. Maybe you're on a temporary project that's particularly exciting. So there might be just different things that you're doing along your work week, in your work day, some that are more hectic than others or some that are more joyous than others. And so again, so for each communication, just recognize that you're bringing something to that. So that's all of you. But the one overarching thing that I want you to think about is, what is the end objective for what you do? There's one end objective, right? So you might have a goal for a project, or you might have, say, a goal for an activity. You're at the membership desk, you're signing someone up for a new class. That interaction is about, well, signing that person up for a new class. But at the end of the day, if you look at what your role is, and let's say that you are the membership person, your end objective is, overall membership. It's not just that interaction, right? So think about always, what is the end objective for what you do? And so I'll give an example. So I tried to take a very, very tiny example so that it is clear and there's just not a lot of other long-term factors that we need to bring in. So let's just think about someone who works right at the front door, receiving people right at the front door. And so you are that person, and think about your job. When do you have the most or the least energy? What gives you energy? I could have put there, when are you the most alert? What's the brightest part of your day? So again, it's about bringing your best self to work. Let's think about the environment that you're in. So you're at a desk or some kind of platform where you're checking people in or people are walking by you. So if people need to show identification or scan their bag or have their card read or something, so is all of that equipment working? Do you have the latest schedules and the locations? So if someone is walking in and saying, hey, I'm going to the lecture on XYZ, do you know where to direct them? Is your area actually welcoming to folks, right? So does it seem like as people are walking in that you are there of service, right, to relate to these people? Can people move around easily? Who are the people that are around you? Remember that your environment isn't just the things in your environment, it's also the people in your environment. So are these regular folks, or are these, new inquiries? What is going on here? Vendors, colleagues, is it mostly customers? Is it mostly, just people from the outside? Is it mostly your colleagues that you're interacting with? And then think about your situation, right? So again, the situation changes throughout the day, but in general, what do people tend to ask of you? For front door reception, you're typically the first line of inquiry because they're the first person that you see. But that's something that you want to be aware of in your own role. Is it slow? Is it busy? What happens if you need some support or need to pull someone in? How can you get to that person or to your other colleagues? What happens when you don't know the answer to something or you can't help someone? So these are all just examples of what someone, say, at the front desk might face. But again, you can translate that to your own experience. And remember when I talked about think about your overarching objective. This is not just a point-in-time interaction. Well, I was thinking about what's the overarching objective of the person who has that role at the front desk. Well, I think, you know, at the 30,000-foot level, that person sets the tone for everything else that happens in that visit. And that has always been my experience when I've coached with other businesses and we look at the different roles of folks. If you think about that person, that very first person that gets seen in reception, it really, really sets the tone. When I think of my own JCC experience, and I am part of a gym that is in the JCC family, I love the person who's at the front desk, and all we interact with is, you know, sometimes I'll ask her about where a location is, but she really just checks my card, and then I walk in. But she always is so sunny and friendly and bright, and it really does set a tone. So when I talk about what is the end objective, again, it's not just about nitpicking a specific interaction. It's about really thinking more broadly about how do you and how does your role relate to the broader mission of where you are. So that's you. Let's talk about the other person. So the other person is, you know, is coming in, let's say, to the front desk, right? So the other person is also hopefully bringing their best self, but we don't know that because we don't know what they're feeling. We don't yet know what they need. But that's the next layer that gets added on. They're stepping into your environment in this case. And so where do they find you? Is it easy to find you? Is the environment welcome and supportive to them, right? So they're bringing a perspective to it. Are they looking for you? Do they happen to find you? Like, what is the sequence of events that's leading to this interaction? And then, of course, there is a situation, right? So again, I talked about during the day that changes for you. Sometimes it's hectic, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's exciting, sometimes you're troubleshooting. For them as well, they're stepping into this interaction, you know, during a particular time. So for them, they might be hectic or relaxed, and they might see you as being hectic or relaxed. So you can see that they're adding a different layer. But again, for them, they have an end objective. They're bringing something into this relationship, and you've got to keep that in mind as you are going to interact with them. So again, continuing the example at the front door, so here's someone who comes in, and let's say they're potentially a new member. And so they're walking in, and what they're bringing is, hey, I've always wanted to join a gym, but I felt intimidated. Now, that might not be what they say outright. That just might be what they're feeling, right? So the communication, again, doesn't have to be a dialogue. It can just be, it can start with a feeling, with the body language that they bring in. Are they anxious? Are they nervous? And so it's really thinking back that, okay, this person's adding another layer. Remember that Maya Angelou quote. It's not about saying, it's not about doing, it's about how you make the person feel. So it's about this empathy. So what are they bringing? So just as an example, I'm suggesting a person who might be wanting to join a gym but feeling intimidated. They step into your environment, and they're bringing with them, okay, if I don't know where I'm going, I'll just turn back, right? If you think about what an anxious person is going to feel like as they walk into a new environment, they very well might turn back if it's at all intimidating. And I live in New York City, and so there are a number of different venues that are associated with the JCC here in New York City. And it's interesting because I've seen different layouts even for just what I'm talking about in terms of that moment that you step in, if you're of the community and you're stepping in. And I went to a talk at another place that I don't frequent as often. It had been a while since I'd been there. And I walked in, and I didn't know where I was going. It was a little bit confusing. There looked like there could be 3 places to check in, and nobody was looking at me and you know, kind of waving me to come over. And so that, you know, this wasn't a tense situation, so I just found my way around. But this is just an example of, okay, so what I'm bringing here is I'm stepping into your environment, and I'm not quite sure where I need to go. I, in fact, did just go to the first person that I noticed that I thought could possibly help me because I just wasn't sure. And so the situation that they're bringing right now is I'm anxious, right, because I want to join this gym, but I'm intimidated normally. But, you know, I'm also excited. I'm proud to finally be here. So there's a waft and there's a range of emotions that this other person is layering into this communication. And remember that end objective. It might be I want to get healthy for my kids. I want to challenge myself. You know, I want to connect. I just want to meet new people. That's why I'm taking a class, or that's why I'm joining a gym. So you want to just recognize that the other person is bringing a whole other set of information to this mix that's going to become a communication, that's going to become a relationship. So let's talk about the actual communication, right? Now, a lot of people think of, if I said communication skills, if I said we're going to have a communication, they would think about the email or the meeting or the presentation or the conversation. But actually, each of those things that I mentioned, an email, a meeting, a presentation, a conversation, those are always 3-part events at a minimum, right? And a relationship, being a series of communications, is, you know, multi-part events. Because in every single communication, there's a before, a during, and an after. And if you think about the before, the prior to the communication, the operative word there is to prepare. You're preparing for a single communication. During the communication, you are listening and adjusting to what is happening in the moment. If you are truly in the present, you are doing the listening part. You're not just saying stuff or thinking about what you're going to say. You are listening. And then finally, the communication happens, and there's follow-up. I mean, it doesn't have to be a follow-up step, but something happens where you need to confirm something or respond to something, or it might be as simple as thanking someone for bringing something to your attention. So again, let's go back. We're at front door reception. Let's think about that communication of someone who is coming in, perhaps to be a new member or sign up for a class, or, you know, they just want to get involved. So if you think about yourself and what you can bring to this, because you won't know, obviously, until you see the other person, what they're layering on. So you can only prepare yourself. And so what can you prepare? Well, you can bring your best self to work. I had mentioned that before, knowing what gives you the most energy, what keeps you alert, what keeps you joyous, like bringing your best self. You can also prepare your environment. So in the example of if you are front desk reception and you're the first point of contact, and a lot of people might be coming in to sign up for stuff, do you have the applications there, the calendar, the brochure, the whatever it is that they're going to ask for, pen and paper if they need to be filling out stuff right then and there. Know the frequently asked questions that the people who are going to be coming in, the prospective customer, perhaps it's a vendor that's dropping off supplies, perhaps your colleagues are walking by, and because you are so central to the area, they might say, hey, have you seen Rose from development, or, you know, whatever. I mean, but have the answers to questions that you are going to get a lot. And in this case, you know, for the new member, it's, you know, if you are that first point of contact, know what they're typically asking. And as you prepare that, maybe there are some holes there. Maybe you've realized that you get some inquiries from people coming in and you don't know the answers to these questions. Or maybe you're constantly running out of pens because somebody takes yours and then runs away with it when you direct them to the membership desk or something like that. So you recognize that there are some gaps that you need to fill. So think about what support, resources, or additional information do you need. And again, it might be something as simple as, I need more pens here, I'm the first point of contact. Or it might be something, I'm getting this question asked a lot, and I'm just not sure, what that answer is. Let me find out what that is. Right? So that's all about preparation before any kind of interaction happens. And then there's the actual communication. So you are talking to, in this case, perhaps a prospective new member that's interested in stuff. So what's that process? Is it simply, as soon as you find out they're a new member, is it simply the membership desk is down the hall to the right, ask for George? Or is it something like, let me get some information, some preliminary information, and then let me call the membership desk and give them a heads up that you're coming? Again, I don't know your particular organization, and there are a number of different people on this line that are going to have different setups. But that's something that you want to think about. What are these typical communications, and can there be a checklist that you have? I've worked in many organizations where that's a great exercise to develop. So I once worked with a university that was trying to increase the number of employers that would come to recruit their students. And so the recruiting outreach person kept a checklist so that every time a company would call, she would be ready with, okay, I'm going to ask them this, I'm going to ask them this, I'm going to ask them this, because these were all the questions she needed to have answered so that she could best organize them for if they decided to come. She could best forward information. She could forward the most relevant information to them if they were interested in specific types of students. So you want to have that checklist. It's a great thing to have during the communication. And then the communication is about solving, delegating, or revisiting, right? So you might be able to give them whatever they need and not have to move this forward. So let's say that someone just comes in and all they want is more information. They don't need to talk to anyone right now. They're stopping by. Do you have this calendar? Do you have an application for this? Do you have a brochure? And you have that stuff. You give that to them. You solve their problem. End of communication. You might have to delegate it. Again, you might have to say, oh, the membership desk, down the hall to the right. Maybe that is what the logical next step is. Or maybe when they come in, they're not quite sure what they're there to do. They're not quite sure what they need, and you need to perhaps call someone else in, and maybe they're not available, and you need to say, well, I'm going to get back to you when I figure out which next person you need to call. And so maybe that's on you. So that's an example of where there might be something that happens in the communication. You might have to get back to them later. But you can see that you're prepping for either kind of the end of the communication, or you need to know, is there something else I need to do, and do I delegate that, or do I handle that myself? And then afterwards, right, so you have this communication, it's still an open loop, because after, even if you've, say, given out the brochure or the application or whatever it is, and that person has gone away, it might be something around going to the membership desk, letting them know, there were quite a number of people coming in asking about that new yoga class, right? It's having that awareness to say, what can I do with this information that I'm having? It might be something like, wow, this person asked a question that wasn't in my frequently asked questions or wasn't on my checklist, and so I really need to update that because I'm learning something here, right? So the communication isn't just about, again, this one point in time. You're getting information that could be helpful for the next go-round. So that's the structure, really, of having a successful communication. You want to feel good about it, and that is the overarching thing. So you want to just make sure that the communication feels right. You want to bring your best self to it. You want to recognize that the other person is going to bring a whole layer of information, of perspective, of feelings into your interaction. And then finally, when you are interacting with the person, you want to have that before, during, and after. You want to be as prepared as you can, but you also want to be listening and actually responding and adjusting, during the interaction, and then you want to take what you've learned and use that to close the loop with the person, and then also to forward and support future interactions. But let's talk about if you're a manager in all of this. If you are running a group or perhaps running the whole thing, so you are not only managing individuals who are doing things, but you might be managing managers who are managing people who are doing things. So this can get, quite layered. So if you're the manager or perhaps a manager of managers, you need to think about your own communication. So you need to go through who you are, the other person, the interactions, all of that, develop your own checklists and FAQs, but then you also need to think about everybody else on your team and the fact that they have to be doing this too, and they have to be doing this successfully. And you want to think about what can you do to help support that. So when I say bring your best self to work, as a manager, you have to think about bringing your best self to work, but then also what can I do to create the workplace so that people bring their best self to work? Because that is your role as a manager. And then when you think about the other person, be it a colleague, a vendor, a customer, a prospective customer, whatever it is, so you have to think about your own people that you interact with day to day, but then you have to think about who are you managing and who are their other people, who are their people that they interact with, and how, again, can you help support them so that they have enough information about these other people. So that, for example, you might know as the manager, you might have a lot of insight into the demographics, the characteristics of prospective members. You might be looking at it from that top-level view, and you can see, wow, we are always super busy during these months of the year. These are the type of people that seem to be really interested in our programming. That's something that's super helpful to share as you start thinking about who else is interacting with these people. And they may not even know this stuff, right? Because you're privy to information and to data that your team may not necessarily know. So that's your role and responsibility, is to figure out, well, how can I support my team and give them this useful information so that they can start developing their frequently asked question list and helpful checklists during key conversations and communications so that they can be successful, right? These FAQs and the checklists, I'm such a fan of them because they make these interactions routine and easy, right? You want to support your team. You want to make it easy for them to do their best work. It also ensures consistency across the team. So if someone, goes on vacation, you're not scrambling to offload all of the best practices in this run-up to vacation, right? It's all there for you. And it minimizes mistakes because, again, sometimes you're just not your best self, or sometimes the situation is hectic or tense or whatever it is, and having that extra support means that, okay, I have this checklist. I know I'm not going to forget something. That's important. And I talked about you having a particular end objective, the other person has an end objective. As a manager, it's important for you to look at that across your team and across your community and customer base, because you want to inspire with the why. You want to manage around the why. The why being getting healthy or discovering a new passion or meeting new friends. Remember that person who's joining the gym? Yeah, maybe it's to lose weight, but maybe it's just to meet new people, right? So it's always about the why, the broader why, the broader end objective. It's not just about a club or a show or a class. Okay, so in terms of business considerations for managers, so this is just a quick example around why this why, W-H-Y, is so powerful. So if this person is coming in to get healthy, then you might want to be building programming around both exercise and nutrition class, or you want to suggest that they take a nutrition class, or you want to make sure that you're not scheduling things on top of each other if you're finding that a lot of people are looking at this get healthy option. If it's discovering passion, you might want to suggest a skills class, meeting new people, a group workout. joining a community. Maybe it's a team and training workout instead of just a group that might meet here or there. Maybe it's something mission-based, something towards a goal. If it's challenging, if that's the goal, is to be challenging, then maybe you want to suggest personal training, right? So just knowing what's behind the motives and the aspirations of, in this case, that new member is going to help you think about your work and how to perhaps do your work, and then your team, how to inspire your team to do their work more effectively. So I just want to summarize, again, how these things all work together. Win-win relationships feel good. So it's about the feeling. It is about the empathy. If you can hold on to that and you can start being aware of that, that is going to help you across all different kinds of interactions. But when you think about breaking down an interaction, there's you. It starts with you. The other person adds another layer that is unique to them. And then, of course, there is the actual communication, which is not a single point in time. It is actually 3 parts. It is what you're doing before. It's what you're doing during the communication, whether that's a meeting, presentation, or conversation. And then it is what happens after, that confirmation, that responding, that adding to the information so that you can support future communication. And with that, I wanted to just go into the questions. Now, Tori, I can tell you I have tried to open up my screen some more, and for whatever reason, it's not doing it. So I'm going to try to unpin it, and hopefully it opens up. So let me just, oh, great. So that worked, that second suggestion you told me. So let me jump in and take some questions, and feel free to keep adding. I now have my question box open. It sounds like the skills will transfer from job to job and from work to life. Absolutely, that's right. I mean, when you think about the best relationships, we can talk about professional relationships and personal relationships. And in some cases, it's one and the same. I mean, we want to like the people that we work with, and our colleagues often very much become our friends. And so I think absolutely you want to feel that way about your community, about your vendors and your customers and all of that. You want to feel like it's personal. And that's really why I wanted to start with feelings. How do you leverage relationships into partnerships? So that's a great question, and I hope that I answered that when I talked a little bit about the business considerations, when I talked about how when you find out what the end objective is for someone, you can really have a much deeper dialogue and therefore a deeper relationship over time with that person, because it's not just going to be about answering their questions. It's actually going to be about perhaps proposing things that they might not know to ask or know to think of. So in terms of leveraging the relationship, it's really about getting to that end objective and thinking about, well, how can I support them? That might mean a partnership, and this is why that partnership, makes more sense, right? And so you can couch it, again, looking at the empathy, you can couch it in a way that works for them. You always want to be mindful. If you're really in it for the long term, you want to be mindful about something working for them and working for you. This is why I said win-win, because that's the only way to go in the long term. Because if it's win for them but it's a lose for you, you're not going to want to repeat this. And if it's a win for you but a loss for them, it's a very short-term type thing. You might be able to get away with it one time, but you're not going to get referrals, or you're not going to get expanded business from that person. So I think the partnership piece, I would say, look at that example around cross-selling and think about what are the end objectives for the people that you are trying to partner with, and have you thought enough about how you might contribute to the end objective as opposed to just what might be talked about superficially in the partnership. I work with members who are sometimes hard time seeing your point of view. Okay, so I work at a community center where some of the members have a hard time seeing your point of view. Well, that's practice and that's coaching. And so what I would say is, I think absolutely some people are more empathetic than others, are more empathic than others, right? So some people just are more attuned to how other people are feeling. What I can say is, I have found, when I've worked with people who don't have that skill. It just hasn't been developed in them. Even in the best of efforts, when they say, but I just didn't even see that she was getting annoyed. I worked with a manager who was just very tough. She was very tough on her people. And she just wasn't a mean person. And she literally was like, I don't understand why people are afraid of me. She couldn't see it. And I have found that for those types of people who just don't seem to get it, what's very helpful, though it's time intensive, but I think it'll pay dividends in the long run, is if you can catch them in the moment. If they do something, let's take this manager that I know that she snap at people, and she didn't even think of it as snapping, and it was helpful to have someone point out to her, you're doing it again, or that's the voice, or that's the look, right? So catching them in the moment, because if you catch them like 3 hours later, they're not even going to remember. It's going to be too hard for them. So I wonder if there are ways for some of the folks that you're interacting with, if in the heated moment, if you can point out, I am really trying to help you, and really just try to bring them back to, let's find someplace where we have a shared agreement. Because you did mention numbers, you didn't say people you're managing. So if it's, again, if it's someone, like it's these ad hoc interactions, you're not going to see these people again, it's trying to get them empathic in the moment to see, I'm trying to help you, and try to get to a shared point of view, however small, right? We both want you to get into this class, or we both want you to be able to sign up for this program or something like that. How does one break through the barrier of fear with initializing conversations with people? So great question. When we talk about relationship building for shy people, and again, I don't recognize the names on here, so I don't know anything about you. But what I can say is, if we're talking about just in general, that you want to meet new people, whether it's just getting closer to your colleagues or getting more involved in your community, I always tell shy people to take it one step at a time, right? To make a goal for yourself. I'm going to have one new interaction this week. I'm going to have lunch with one new colleague this week, or I'm going to attend an event and I am not going to leave until I talk to 3 people that I don't know and just introduce myself. You don't even have to set a high goal to talk about anything in particular. You just want to introduce yourself. So sometimes the fear of moving through the fear is just practice, 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 practice. Another thing is to buddy up with someone where this isn't a fear. And so if you've got an extroverted friend and they're always, in a group going out to lunch, tag along with that person and learn from that person, watch that person. So that's another thing that you can do. If you're talking about professionally on the job, so perhaps you have a role that requires, I don't know, maybe you're in some kind of customer service role where people are coming to you with inquiries or in difficult situations where you have to troubleshoot. Again, I think trying to make it as easy for yourself as possible, things like FAQs and checklists are so important so that you're not just hanging out there. And the other thing is to enlist the support of your colleagues and of your manager to let them know what situations make you uncomfortable. Maybe they have some suggestions. Maybe there's some information that they can give you, or perhaps they can, I don't know, double up staff during particular busy times. Like, I'm not sure what exactly the trigger would be for when the situations get uncomfortable, but this is part of that after part of the communication. If you can start to catch yourself around, gosh, why would I need an improvement on this? What communication didn't work well or didn't feel right? And, what types of support perhaps could I ask for, right, to help me? That might be something that you could do. Internal communication with staff. How much is too much or too little? You know what? That is going to depend on the staff, and that is going to depend on what's going on. The thing about communication, and I would add, too, the mode of communication should change depending on really, the broader team and what you're trying to impart. Now, you can't have a verbal communication with everybody, right? So sometimes you pick the communication, let's say an email announcement, because you need to get it out simultaneously to 200 people. So I'm sensitive to that, right? So sometimes there are practical considerations. But think about your mode of communication, say, when you do have a choice, when it's email versus phone versus in person. Part of it is going to be based on what the communication is about, but part of it should also be based on how that person likes to communicate, right? So if you think about that way, it's the same thing with too much or too little, where some people are going to think it's too much regardless of how little you say something. Some people are going to think it's too little regardless of how much you contribute. So it's not about getting buy-in with everybody, but I would be asking for feedback around, especially for people that you find are quite in tune with the pulse of the workplace. Let's say they're always people who are friends with everybody, who have that intuitive sense about what people are thinking. How did that memo go over? Or maybe you're, I don't know, restructuring something or building something, or in the middle of a capital campaign, or there's something big going on. Asking the people who you feel like have a good sense of what's going on in the office. So are you finding that people are interested in the week by week of the new build out, or is that too much, or what? So some of it's going to be trial or error. There isn't a right or wrong thing that's going to work for everybody. Some of it's going to be based on what people have done before, and that's something to check too if you're new in a role or if you're introducing something. Sometimes we prefer things because it's habitual, because, well, that's the way the other person always did it, and so if you don't do a weekly memo, even if I never read it, I'm going to think it's because you're hiding something, or you're being standoffish, or you're not sharing. And so you have to think about, what's the tone that you want to set, like what are people expecting, and again, that doesn't mean that you have to do it that way, but that might mean that you want to gradually move into, from now on, I'm going to be doing bi-monthly, town hall talks or emails instead of doing the weekly. So it's really going to depend. Let's see. I work in large early childcare programs, hope to polish communication with families and staff. So I find that when you're dealing with a number of very different constituents, and I worked in a charter school for a year, and I was dealing with regulators, families, the kids, the teachers, the colleagues, so there were a lot of different constituents, and everybody had a different end objective. This is so important to really try to figure out kind of what is it, that we're all pulling for, what is their perspective on things, and then again, being mindful of how do they like to communicate, what is the ideal frequency. Again, it's different for different people, so having that empathy and keeping that data over time. It's very hard. That's why it's so hard to step into a situation where you might be dealing with lots of people, to know, because you don't know what's expected, what's been done before. And so as you are plotting out the early childhood stuff, start thinking about, well, when you've worked in other early childhood programs, what have people most, wanted to hear? What was the ideal frequency of communication with the families versus with, say, the other teachers versus with, people maybe outside of teaching day-to-day, but who definitely need to be kept in the loop, like special services or whatnot. So start thinking about, what is the stuff that I know? What is the stuff that I need to find out still that's going to help me? What's the trial and error that I need to do? And what am I going to be looking for to know that I'm successful? It might be that 30 days into it, you take a survey, a mini survey or something, to ask people, my plan is to be doing a weekly update. Is that too much, too little? All of that kind of stuff. A lot of different departments under one roof. Want to work the best with my colleagues. So again, thinking about what people are bringing to the table, what their motives are, how they work differently, and checking in, right? So this isn't just about theorizing it. You theorize it, and you go with your best efforts based on what you know and what you read of the people you're interacting with, but you might have to change it. And I would say different departments, again, some departments, might be just their personality, the temperament overall. They might want more information versus less, or it's delivered in a different kind of way. To the extent that that doesn't add that much to you, that might be worth doing. You'd have to look at what the cost is, what the benefit is of that. And again, sometimes it depends on the situation. If there is a big, say, I'm going to go back to the capital campaign, you know, it could very well be, of course, that finance and development, and if this is around, say, a building campaign, maybe, you know, operations facilities needs to have more frequent and different information than, you know, some of the other departments. So I think it really is going to depend on the situation and your relationship and what you know about each of the departments. With relationships built virtually everywhere, online and offline, what makes relationships sticky? So that's a great question, and that word sticky is such a good way to characterize it. I'm wondering if you mean sticky as in they keep coming back so that it's long-term. I think the long-term relationships are always built on mutual benefit, where people feel like this person is looking out for me and I'm going to look out for them, right? So there's that long-term buy-in. And again, I keep harking back to that end objective, because I really do feel like when you start understanding what that is for everybody that you interact with, and everybody, you know, meaning also the community, right? So what is your role within the community? When you can answer that and you have a mission behind that and clarity behind that, I think that is going to be super helpful. When talking to my employers, particularly difficult conversations, I stumble over my words, would like to get tips on how to feel more confident and comfortable. So this is where, if you know that you do that, and you know that happens to the best of us, this is where communication being a three-part event, someone like you who might think that you're going to stumble, and then this is where you've stumbled before, in the preparation, you want to build in that time to do a lot of role-playing, to do a lot of, I want to say research, but I don't mean like school paper research. I mean thinking about what is it that I'm going to say, what do I know about this other person, where might they push back or have questions or challenge me or get uncomfortable, and that makes me uncomfortable, and then I stumble, right? So to the extent that you can, before you even get to the conversation, you can start preparing that kind of stuff and do a lot of role playing. There's nothing better than practicing in performance conditions, really having someone role play, okay, I'm going to give you a performance review and you're going to cry, or you're going to get really sad about it, or you're going to, and you know, have that other person, coach that other person to role play what you think the person is going to do, whatever it is, again, push back or be mean or, you know, whatever, that makes you stumble. And you have to know that you can get through that. You have to practice getting through that. Balancing honesty with maintaining the relationship. It's definitely not an either or. I think when we say honesty, there's there's honesty for just brutality's sake, and there's honesty because I'm trying to move this relationship forward. Sometimes you can't share everything. Sometimes, you know, and again, I don't know your all different organizations, but I've been in a lot of situations, because I came from HR, where there's been a restructuring, or there's a potential acquisition, or there's something where there's a part of the message that I just can't share, or that the manager just can't share, and then I have to help coach the manager on the messaging. So sometimes you just can't say everything, and so what you want to think about is, what do I need to share, and how do I need to share it in a way that the person feels good? I would say that for that question around balancing honesty with getting your point across, or getting things done, refer back to that idea, that Maya Angelou quote around, it's not about saying and doing, it's about the feeling. And sharing enough so that you're honest with yourself and you feel like your integrity with what you can share, but then also that you're making the person feel heard and feel good. I know we have just a few minutes, and we have so many great questions. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. Okay, I want my personal training staff to feel more connected so they do not quit. So here again, thinking about that end objective. And Joy, Tori, I don't know how you feel about, I don't know if you can copy these questions somehow, and that for people who have to jump off the line, I have a conference system. I can record my answers to these and just send you that as a separate thing. I don't know, but I don't think I'm going to get through everything. I've had a few situations come up where members have expected special treatment. How can I make members feel appreciated without, giving them what they expect? So again, it might be pointing to where you can find some agreement. It might be around educating them about why you can't do something, and really, sometimes people feel like you can do it and you just don't want to do it, right? So sometimes it's in the interpretation. So it could be that they're feeling you just don't want to help them. And so that's really what the stickiness is, or that's where the conflict is. It's that you don't want to help them as opposed to you're not giving them this thing. And so it's about making sure that they understand that, and it's about making sure that they feel heard. And then also, you don't have to justify why you're saying no, but I do think that it is helpful when people have a reason. That's why it's so tricky if it's something like there's a potential acquisition or something where you can't give the whole message. That's really a case-by-case basis. How do you convince someone or share stuff with someone without giving them the whole picture? But in this case, I'd be surprised if there isn't something that you can share, perhaps a story of why the rules are, why they're so important, that kind of stuff, to really humanize it and to make them feel like you're not just saying no, type of thing. Okay. Okay, well, this would be emails. With your suggestion on getting info to a large number of people, number of people over a long period of time. So again, that's always so tricky. I think it's going to depend on who the people are. Large number of people, I immediately think of an email announcement. Again, a lot of things get lost in translation. It might be recording then, an audio message, and that's the thing that gets put out by email, or a little video playback, something like that. When I mentioned, I don't think I'm going to get through all the questions, perhaps I can answer them on a conference call and have that added to this webinar. I didn't say I was going to write the answers back. One of the reasons why I like to say the answers back is because I do feel like people feel like they're getting some coaching when I'm answering the questions live in the webinar. So that is why I said that. And so sometimes the audio is more powerful than the written stuff. But sometimes if you want to make sure they understand the deadlines, if there's a sequence of events you're explaining, then sometimes it's written. So I think it really depends, Priscilla, on what you're trying to get out, how complicated it is. And when you say a long period of time, I'm not sure if you mean sequentially there's going to be a 52-week lesson plan, or if it's something else. I mean, I think it really is going to have to depend on what their next steps are going to be and how much you want them to absorb. A lot of what has been outlined has to do with audience prep work, which is great. However, can you speak a little about the middle part, listen and adjust, within a potential conflict? Okay, great question. So yeah, no, definitely I did gloss over that because I was really trying to get through a lot of different concepts today. But when I say listen and adjust, one of the big stumbling blocks in communication is because people are so prepped around what they're going to say, or they didn't prep and then they're thinking in the moment about what they're going to say, that they don't really listen to the other person. And so some of the things are listen with your ears, right? So what are they saying? How are they saying it? Are they showing signs of fear, anxiety, of anger? Listen also with your eyes. Look at them. Make eye contact. Are they able to make eye contact? Are they gesticulating wildly? Are they getting upset? Kind of. So look at the nonverbal cues. What's that telling you? And really, pay attention. Listen with your mind. Do you understand what they're saying? And I mean, so that you can act upon it, so that you can respond to them. And if you don't understand what they're saying because they're so worked up, don't be afraid to ask a question, just so I'm clear, blah, 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 right? So listening, it takes a lot of different things. And then listen with your heart, that whole idea of, does this feel good? Does this feel right? I want to say that that's what I mean by listening, like using all of the forces and listening with the rest of your body in terms of if you're getting, that curl in your stomach, or there's something where you feel tension, that person's giving off tension to you, pay attention to that, right? Because you want to adjust to that. So that's the listening part. It's to really stop thinking about what you're going to say next and really just start appreciating the person. If you've done your preparation, you'll know what to say next. And then in terms of adjusting, what I mean by adjust is that you do preparation based on what you think the person is going to say, when you deliver whatever thing you're going to deliver is, right? So let's say that you're planning to have a performance review and you think the person's going to push back, but instead of actually pushing back, the person breaks down, right, and gets really upset. And so all of your rehearsed responses go out the window. This is what I mean by adjusting. And maybe it's just being in that moment. It doesn't mean that you have to answer that person's questions. If that person says something to you and you really don't know what your next step is going to be or how you're going to react to that, don't feel like you have to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. It might just be, wow, that's a great point, and I appreciate you telling me that. I need to think about that, and let's make a note to talk about this some other time, right? So that's that part about you delegate it or you table it for later. So I think the adjusting comes in, as you're listening and after you're listening, that you don't just default to all of the preparation, that it's about saying, you know what, maybe I prepared the wrong thing. And maybe that means I can't finish this conversation and I have to table it for next time. That's what I mean by listening and adjusting. How should one react to the other person crossing the line from working relations to personal relations, non-romantic, but preserve a good peer relationship? Okay, so again, it's going to be so different. It's going to be based on your boundaries, but it's really just thinking about you want the person to know that you appreciate them, but that I really would love to have an example, and I know, Jake, that you have gone. So, I mean, it's one of these things where I wish we could just talk back and forth. But I'm glad you brought up, oh, good, we're down to the last one, so I feel like I can answer this one at least. I'm glad you brought up making sure my environment feels set up to support me. I run an after-school program with 180, oh my goodness, children. Congratulations, 14 staff, and I only have one supervisor. I feel under-supported, have mentioned this, but it's been hard to change this without being able to provide concrete details for each situation in which I don't feel supported. Is this the only way to get the help I am seeking? Well, what I would say is this the only way to get help? I just think it's a very productive way to get help, is to actually pinpoint the situations and decide what help to ask for. Because sometimes when we don't get the help that we are asking for, it's because the other person doesn't know how to help you. So let's say I need more support, but what does that support mean? And so it's not the only way to get support, but it's a very productive way to get support. And so I don't want to give you more work, right? So you're stretched and you're thinking, what, am I supposed to pull out a piece of paper and start writing down these situations? But find some quiet time where you're not emotional about it, where it's not a hectic situation, because goodness gracious, and everything's going to feel like you need more support right there. But it's just saying, okay, in the last 5 days, what were some examples of times where I really could have used another body? And that other body might have been a supervisor. It might be a staff person. It might be a parent volunteer. It might be, something. So you can just start playing around. It's almost like building a business case and just really saying, okay, I'm not in this situation right now. I'm above the situation, and I'm just going to look over it, and I'm just going to see, what are the kinds of things that might be helpful. And again, it might not even be a resource. It might just mean a change in a schedule, or it might just mean having specific types of equipment or something. But this is what I mean by just kind of trying to step back and looking for, how do I solve this puzzle? Because everyone's dealing with limited budget, limited resources, and trying to solve a lot of different problems. So to the extent that you can be very, very specific about what some of these problems are and what the potential solutions might be, that's the gateway. That's the beginning to having the other person help you. They might also have some excellent ideas. And this is, again, this is another reason why I said for managers, you've got to be thinking not just about yourself, but also how to support, everybody else on your team. So I hope that answers your question without giving you too much extra work, but I do think the answer is going to be somewhere in just taking a step back and looking at the situation and brainstorming as a start, because I just don't think that without the specifics, I don't think that asking for help or asking for support is going to get you any closer, because, again, even though if the person's willing, they're just not going to know how to respond. So I think I was able to get through everything without keeping you guys crazy over. Tori, Joy, do you want to jump in and close, or am I supposed to just close?
Thank you very much. No, I got it. Caroline, that was great. I think you did a good job in introducing the topic and then getting to everybody's questions. Thanks so much for everybody who hung in there with us, even though we went a little bit over on time. It's a really important topic, and I hope that Caroline was able to give you some important things to think about and put into practice. The recording of the webinar will be posted on jcca.me starting next week, so please tell your colleagues who are not able to attend that they can find this webinar there. I had seen a note from somebody that they wanted to use it with their staff, so that's a great way to be able to have a staff meeting around past webinars we've been able to post online. I'd like to say thank you to Caroline for her time today. And don't forget, when you close out of the webinar, that there will be a short survey that pops up so that you will be able to give us your feedback. If you have any questions about professional development department or suggestions for upcoming topics, please contact me, joy@jcca.org. And on your screen you can see Caroline's contact information as well as her website. So check it all out. She's got some good stuff there. Thanks again for participating today. Look forward to seeing everybody again at a future webinar. And thank you to our presenter. Have a great day. Bye-bye.